Before he died, beloved United States Representative John Lewis said, "Access to the internet is the civil rights issue of the 21st century." Charles Benton and the Benton Foundation saw this coming. Let me share a brief timeline. In 1982, the Benton Foundation, not yet called the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, invested in C-SPAN with the conviction that public interest communication is essential for a strong democracy. That was before 1991, when Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web and AOL started up. It was then AOL was a baby enterprise and the nation started emailing. Jump to the year 2000. The same year that Apple released the iPhone, the Benton Foundation provided a map of the digital divide network, showing the unequal access to communication throughout the nation. Charles Benton and the foundation understood that equal access to communication meant unequal education at all levels, unequal health care, unequal opportunity for jobs, unequal communities. We jump now to 2013, when Adrianne Benton Furniss becomes executive director of the Benton Foundation, with a publication highlighting accessibility, diversity, openness, intercommunication, speed. They were ahead of the game. 2015, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, declares broadband a telecommunications service. Then, in 2020, COVID-19 hits. Schools close. Healthcare becomes a national crisis. Personal isolation affects us all. The Benton Institute for Broadband and Society is hard at work to correct the digital divide map it had the forethought to analyze and denounce in the year 2000. One of the pleasures of growing old is learning to know and admire the children of friends independent of their parents. This is a blessing of my new friendship with Adrianne. I saw her first as the board leader of Cartemkin Films, a Chicago treasure. Then, following her talks and publications for the Benton Institute, I learned that she has spent her career in public communication, first at Children's Television Workshop, which we know as Sesame Street, or Sesame Workshop rather, with Big Bird and Sesame Street. Then returning to Chicago, working up to CEO and president of Home Vision Entertainment, which she sold before becoming executive director of the Benton Institute in 2013. Thus, it is with special enthusiasm that the Stevenson Center brings you Adrianne Benton Furniss to discuss the broadband divide that exists today and the creative work of the Benton Institute and others to overcome those gaps, bringing their effort is to bring universal, affordable, high-speed broadband to all. I turn it over to you, Adrianne, with thanks.
Oh, good afternoon, and thank you, Nancy, for inviting me to speak to the Stevenson Center about the power of broadband and for that very kind introduction. And as well, let me also thank Warwick Stevenson, who has helped with producing today's session. And then I also want to point out that my colleague, Robbie McBeath, is here because he's helped me with my talk and my slides, and I hope will participate later in the Q&A. So this speech is called The Infrastructure of Opportunity, and I want to start on a personal note, which of course Nancy alluded to earlier, which is that the Stevenson Benton clans go way back. My grandfather, Senator William Benton, and Governor Stevenson worked together, politicked together, and traveled together. In this picture on the left, the governor has just announced his acceptance of the first major position in the field of business since his return to private life following the 1956 presidential election. He accepted the post of chairman of the advisory board of Encyclopedia Britannica Films. My grandfather, chair of the board of the company, is on the left. And the picture on the right shows my grandparents and Governor Stevenson at the airport departing for their 1960 Latin American tour. My grandfather wrote a book after that tour, and Governor Stevenson wrote the foreword, and I've just been paging through it. It's quite wonderful. But one of my earliest memories as a young girl was driving to the Stevenson farm in Libertyville, while my mother, Marjorie, who I think is on this call today, and the governor would eat a dozen ears of corn. I ran around chasing sheep. To cool down, I would climb onto the governor's lap and he'd read me the newspaper, oftentimes the New York Times. So as you can see, interest in knowledge runs deep in both families. That's why I'm particularly honored to be here today to talk about what I call the infrastructure of opportunity. This past year is not one we'll want to remember, but it's also a year we'll never forget. Let me unconventionally start by telling you what we didn't know. We did not know that millions would lose their jobs, unemployment would linger, economic growth would nosedive, and many businesses would face retrenchment, if not extinction. We did not know that students of all ages would be forced to connect with teachers and classmates via teleconferencing from home, or if they were on the wrong side of the digital divide, from library or fast food parking lots, or from school buses outfitted with Wi-Fi parked in neighborhoods unserved by broadband. We did not know that telehealth would become a pressing national need, not just in the treatment of COVID, but as a way to provide safe access to healthcare generally. And we did not know that people would be blocked from government services, not because of closed offices, but because of insufficient bandwidth or lack of digital skills. For the good of all of us, we've been asked to stay at home as much as possible. Broadband makes that bearable, and if we're lucky to continue, many of us can continue to work and to learn. Most importantly, it connects us to health services and vital information so we can stay safe in what has felt and still continues to feel like a very dangerous time. That's the power of broadband. But what about the millions of Americans for whom broadband is unavailable or is unaffordable? The stark realities of digital disparity have never been clearer. The pandemic stay-at-home orders quickly revealed a digital chasm. Too many people are unable to access jobs, learning, healthcare, and government services. And that's the tragedy we call the digital divide. Next slide, Robbie. So I always think that pictures are worth 1,000 words. So at the top right is a family in rural Georgia who drive 20 miles each way to access Wi-Fi at the Chick-fil-A so the 4 kids in this van can do their homework. In the lower right is a student in Las Vegas who is doing his coursework thanks to a bus providing Wi-Fi. And finally, here's a family on Golden Pond in New Hampshire struggling with internet connectivity. On the next slide, we see a worker hanging out in the back of her van accessing Wi-Fi to do her job, and a patient engaged in a telehealth session. So let's take a step back and talk about what broadband means. And Nancy suggested that I start at the beginning. So please excuse me if many of you know this, and I promise we'll get to a deeper level in just a bit. Broadband refers to how we connect to the internet, and it's shorthand for an always-on high-speed connection provided by what's called an internet service provider. We say always on to differentiate contemporary broadband connections from the dial-up or DSL era of the 1990s, when a user had to dial a telephone number through their computer to connect. Getting kicked off the internet because someone had to make a phone call is not broadband, even though DSL, with its slow speeds, is still the most common type of connection in rural America. So this slide talks about the 6 ways that people can access broadband. And so for this talk, we're going to concentrate or focus on the bottom tier. That's what we call wireline or fixed broadband, meaning a wire delivering service runs into a home or business. Now, speed is pretty important when we talk about broadband, because when we talk about speed, we're really getting at the capacity of a connection to handle more and more of our digital lives. Now, unfortunately, the federal agency that's charged with regulating telecom, the Federal Communications Commission, which I'll refer to as the FCC, has not updated the speed benchmark for broadband in over 5 years. Now, at the current speed benchmark, which we call 25/3, meaning 25 down and 3 up, you can stream a Netflix movie, and another user in your household could post Instagram content, and neither would experience any slowdown. But this speed is inadequate for multiple people in the same household to do video conferencing at the same time. Public investment to build broadband networks today is still supporting capacity that was aspirational 5 years ago, but is about 1/4 of what typical subscribers pick today. For instance, through a cable company such as Comcast, which is available particularly in high-density urban areas. So even with the many different ways that people in this country can access the internet, there are differences in capacity that affect how useful the service is. And that's what so many people experienced this year. With everybody home, trying to simultaneously use video conferencing tools for school and work, many people didn't have the capacity to meet their needs. So let's be clear, not all broadband is created equal. Fiber is considered the gold standard of broadband connections. It's incredibly fast and can handle a near unlimited amount of data and users. The problem is that it is expensive to lay down, and as such, many companies do not want to invest in its deployment without a guaranteed return on investment or federal dollars to help. This is something that has been difficult to achieve in rural America. Next slide, Robbie. So that's broadband. But what does it mean for the 141 million people, about 43% of the country, who don't have access at home? And what's the state of the digital divide in the US? So for some people, there is no broadband network available to them at any price. In too many areas, commercial providers have determined there's just not enough return on their investment to build. But most often, people assume that this is a problem in less densely populated rural areas. And that's true with about 26% of people who lack access to fixed broadband. And it's worse on tribal lands, where less than half of the households on rural tribal lands have access to fixed broadband. So let's not think that all urbanites have broadband, because from a sheer numbers perspective, there are almost 3 times as many people without broadband in urban and metro areas than in rural areas. And a key issue is cost. So this pie chart shows that policymakers focus both attention and dollars on the 2 smallest slivers, the 21 million or so people in areas with no option for broadband at the benchmark speed set by the FCC. But high cost and lack of competition dominate the larger slices. The 2 bigger light blue slices represent people who cannot afford to subscribe or can only afford to sign up for a lower tier of service. Why is cost a leading factor? The price US consumers pay for broadband is the 3rd highest in the world. And 37% of non-broadband users cite the cost of a computer as one of the reasons they do not have broadband at home. Next slide. Thanks, Robbie. And communities of color and low-income Americans are far more likely not to use broadband than are whites and people with higher incomes. For really low-income households, our research shows that about $10 per month is the most that low-income households can afford to pay for broadband. And cost obviously is not just an urban issue. Where broadband is available in rural areas, only 63% of people actually subscribe. Cost is also a factor for them. Rural areas of the US pay upwards of 37% more for broadband than the densest urban centers. Where broadband is available, many rural Americans do not enjoy competition in providers. This contributes to artificially high prices for service. Now, there's more to the digital divide than access and cost. There's also digital literacy. 1/3 of people who don't subscribe to broadband say they lack the skills they need to successfully navigate digital devices. So groups across the country have developed innovative digital literacy training strategies to assist those who do not feel the internet is relevant to them, as well as those who already understand the importance of the internet to their everyday lives, but need help with everything from setting up an email account to installing security measures. This is especially critical in the time of COVID. Unreliable websites and complex online tools are being used to schedule COVID-19 vaccine appointments across the US. And I can just tell you how long my husband spent trying to navigate getting vaccine appointments for us across 4 or 5 different websites. The systems have been hard to navigate for many people, and they've been particularly inaccessible for older adults. Only around half of people over the age of 75 use the internet at all. So the great irony is that the people we need to reach with the vaccine and get information to are the ones we are least likely to be online. Now that's the national picture, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about the digital divide here in Illinois, because it's essentially a microcosm of the US. About a little over 70% of Illinois households subscribe to wireline high-speed internet service. That means over 1.4 million Illinois households do not subscribe to such service. And the figures with African American households and Latino households are considerably lower compared to white households who have wireline broadband. And just over half of people 75 years or over subscribe to high-speed internet service at home. Here in Illinois, 1 in 5 households with children under the age of 18 do not have a wireline high-speed subscription. And this is at a time, of course, when no internet connection means no school for these kids. Next, there we go, Robbie, thanks. When you look at these maps, I find these really kind of extraordinary. The Chicago map showing the digital divide on the right aligns with the map on the left of low-income areas on the south and west sides. And I think the point to make here is that there are so many issues that we need to address so that people can use the infrastructure of opportunity. This includes finding solutions to the problems of availability and quality of service. It means finding solutions to affordability, and it means finding solutions to digital literacy. Overcoming these barriers, and I love Nancy for picking the John Lewis quote, and I'm going to repeat it again because he did tell us before he passed that access to the internet is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Cities and states with racial and geographic disparities in health and economic status face a choice. Should broadband become just another marker of racial and geographic inequity, or should we make the choice to support and empower communities of color and rural and tribal areas through equal access to affordable broadband and the digital skills to use it? When the community of advocates for universal service, within the community of advocates for universal broadband, the debate on whether broadband is a luxury or an essential connection to society is over. Given the amount of mainstream press coverage around the digital divide, we don't spend quite as much time talking about why broadband is important. More and more, we are helping stakeholders try to get their arms around how to solve these critical issues and what role these stakeholders can play. So, how do we solve this problem, and what role is the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society playing? Benton is in the business of providing resources, research and analysis, newsletters, publications, podcasts, as well as legal and policy expertise. And we try to communicate to stakeholders and the public why broadband for all matters. Our public includes policymakers at all levels of government, public interest and social justice groups, communities, philanthropy, media, and more. And we try to take the long view. This year is our 40th anniversary, and over the course of those 40 years, we've presented national policy agendas that seek to preserve and strengthen the public interest, not just corporate agendas. In 2019, we published Broadband for America's Future, a vision for the 2020s that emphasized 3 enduring principles. First, that everyone in America should be able to use broadband by the end of the decade. And to do that required a multifaceted and comprehensive broadband agenda. And the third thing was that state and local leadership working with national policymakers was critical. Making high-performance broadband available to everyone in America is an important ingredient for a more just America, a healthier society, and an economy that offers true opportunity for everyone. In 2020, we released Broadband for America Now. So you'll note that the previous publication was a decade, and the second was into the pandemic, when we realized how desperately we needed to move faster to inject a new sense of urgency into implementing equitable broadband policies based on the ways people use broadband now, which changed obviously so drastically with COVID. We propose an integrated strategy which articulates the need for leaders at all levels of government to embrace 4 building blocks of policy to close the digital divide. And let me take these briefly one by one. We start with digital equity, the need to make high performance broadband available and affordable to low income, unserved and underserved populations, accompanied by training in digital skills that empowers users to make the most of their connections. Deployment, we need to fund it to build future-proof networks in places where people don't have robust broadband choices. In a world in which the talents of all people matter, broadband infrastructure investment is a necessary economic strategy. Addressing infrastructure and its costs may seem daunting, but America has solved very similar infrastructure challenges in the past. In the 1930s with rural electrification, and in the 1950s with the building of the interstate highway system. 80%, I always am stunned by this statistic, 80% of people in this country only have 2 or fewer choices when it comes to selecting an internet service provider. And 16 companies hold 96% of US home broadband subscriptions. So we're big believers in competition, which would help lower service prices, improve quality, and drive innovation. And finally, we need to empower community anchor institutions like schools, hospitals, libraries, and community leaders to play a key role because they are closest to local needs and have earned Americans' confidence and trust. So we can't build back better without broadband. It's been heartening for us because during the presidential campaign, when many of our Benton fellows and staff were involved talking with Biden advisors, that he articulated 4 policy priorities, obviously relating to COVID-19, economic recovery, racial equity, and climate change. And broadband has a role in each of these areas, whether it's delivering telehealth, jobs through construction of networks as part of an infrastructure package, digital literacy training and affordability to close the digital equity gap, which, as we've said, disproportionately affects rural and tribal communities and communities of color. And on the climate change front, applications for farmers to more sustainably manage their lands and output, and for cities to implement smart grid technology. Our primary goal in 2021 and over the course of the next 4 years is to work to make universal affordable broadband a reality in the US. And that work is underway. So this is a list of basically federal level major COVID-19 relief legislation that's been introduced in the last year and has included a lot of money for broadband. Starting at the top, there was a coronavirus relief fund established a year ago, and many states used some of those funds for remote learning, telehealth, public Wi-Fi, giving computers and hotspots to kids, and more. We saw in December the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, which had a $3.2 billion billion for something that we're working on called the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. And it gives $50 discount on broadband service to low-income people, including those who have experienced job or income loss due to the pandemic. And that discount for tribal lands is $75. And the program is actually expected to launch next month, with providers already signing up and participants also beginning to familiarize themselves with how to participate. And then recently, the Biden administration has unveiled its infrastructure proposal. And this is, of course, called the American Jobs Plan. It does call for investing $100 billion to ensure universal high-speed internet access, comparing the efforts to the rural electrification efforts of the 30s. Interestingly, in Friday's New York Times, a poll showed that 78% of people, including 62% of Republicans, approve of making high-speed broadband internet available nationwide. And there's been obviously a very big debate about what is infrastructure. And of course, we're pleased by that polling, because then the public, as you can see, is very behind, including broadband in that plan. I think if we do this, we're going to actually put the Benton Institute out of business, but we'll see how much of that goes forward. Let me turn now to what's happening with developing capacity at the state and local level. And, governors, I think it was 35 or 36 governors actually talked about broadband in their State of the State addresses this year. They are obviously focused a lot at this particular point on trying to impact broadband policy, but also to empower communities and regions to plot their own broadband futures. And this is why part of what we do is to identify and highlight best community practices and strategies, so that local leaders who sometimes don't know how to accomplish their broadband goals, we don't want them reinventing the wheel. As I said before, Benton likes to emphasize the connection between state, local, and federal efforts, and how federal funding should be fused with more trusted state, tribal, and local leadership who have a better understanding of their political and economic environments, their health threats, their own resource levels, and broadband usage needs. States are finding innovative and creative ways to advance their broadband goals. They're stepping up with comprehensive approaches that include funding, stakeholder outreach, capacity building, program evaluation, and partnerships. And so to that end, we're super lucky to be based in Illinois and be a strategic partner with the State of Illinois' Office of Broadband. So here are a few maps about some of the programs that Illinois is doing. This is the $400 million infrastructure investment. It's the largest of any state, called the Connect Illinois program. And the program released $50 million last year. They just accepted applications for the next round of $50 million. And they have a strategic plan that talks about achieving statewide broadband access by 2024 and nation-leading higher speed connectivity by 2028. And over the last year, the state has announced further investment in various digital equity plans that supplement and complement this historic broadband infrastructure investment. So Benton is managing a community planning and engagement program called Illinois Connected Communities. And I love this program because on the ground, it really does demonstrate democracy in action. Before we start a proven step-by-step curriculum and deliver coaching and instruction, we guide communities in creating an inclusive steering committee which reflects community composition. Steering teams include people from underrepresented populations and key community organizations, such as local government, libraries, schools, hospitals, and businesses. And we task them with the creation of a strategic action plan for something they choose to concentrate on, whether it's broadband access or deployment, adoption or utilization, or some combination of those. And we want them to tie their broadband goals to larger community efforts in economic and workforce development, education, healthcare, farming, and more. And so the map on this slide talks about the 12 communities that are close to being done with our first year of this program. There were 5 in Cook County, including 2 Chicago neighborhoods, and 7 in the rest of the state. And we're currently actually reading applications for the second round or the second year of program, which will begin in mid-2021 with a similar mix of communities in Cook County and communities in the rest of the state. We also are doing with the state of Illinois a Broadband Connections newsletter. And this is a collaborative effort between the Illinois Office of Broadband and the Benton Institute to bring Illinois specific broadband news to subscribers. And we actually are just about to wrap up our first year. So I think we've released 24 newsletters. We're doing it semi-monthly. And this newsletter provides information on state and local initiatives, as well as news of federal actions that would impact Illinois broadband efforts. And the newsletter started, I forget, several hundred people, but we're up to over 1,000 people and counting. And this, I want to commend Robbie again, because he's the one who's writing the bulk of this and also participating in our Illinois Connected Communities program, and so is getting a really bird's eye view of what's happening on the ground. Then the next slide, thank you, Robbie, is I serve on the national board of PCs for People, which is a national nonprofit focused on getting low-cost computers and affordable broadband internet into the home of low-income individuals. And at the end of last year, the state and Cook County announced a first-of-its-kind initiative to expand digital access for low-income households in Illinois, and it's called the Connect Illinois Computer Equity Network. The network, which is managed by PCs for People, will deploy refurbished computers, which we secure from corporations, nonprofits, governments, universities, etc. And the computers are wiped and refurbished, and then we distribute them through a statewide network of public and private partners. We also, it's paired with digital literacy program and workforce development. And the initial grant was given by the Illinois COVID Response Fund to open a hub in the Metro East area. The grand opening of the Belleville, Illinois facility was actually last Friday. And there is a hub which we're also trying to establish in Cook County. We have a temporary location in oak forest, but we're looking for a permanent home. And between these two hubs, north and south, we'll have distribution events for each county in the state in 2021. Now, I love this picture because in the lower right-hand side is actually Robbie's grandmother. And she lives west of Chicago, near the cornfields of Elburn, Illinois, and she did not have broadband. Through PCs for People, she received a discounted Wi-Fi hotspot, enabling her to communicate with her family and grandchildren via video for the first time. And I remember Robbie telling me how relieved the family was when they could finally see her, and that she had received this wonderful tool from PCs for People. And I love these pictures. I think the one on the left, Robbie, was from the Harvey, Illinois distribution. That's my memory, the city of Harvey. And we've done distribution events, as I said, in many, many locations, with partnering with churches, the Girl Scouts of Southern Illinois, various housing authorities all over the state. So again, our newsletter would show you exactly if you wanted to either donate equipment or find out whether there was a local event in your area, you could find that information. So in conclusion, and then we'll take some questions, I do want to, of course, reiterate that the tragedies that have unfolded since March 2020 have only increased Benton's resolve that universal and affordable high-performance broadband is more than a goal. It's a necessity for people to survive and thrive in the 21st century. And the strength of high-performance broadband is that it will, if fully accessible to all in America, help solve some of our most critical challenges and help people overcome key barriers, regardless of where they live and who they are. We must start addressing at-home internet access, not as a troubling issue, but as a civil rights emergency in need of a comprehensive solution. We ask for broadband for America now, since our current crises demand it. Thanks very much, everybody. I will, at this particular point, Robbie, I think we'll go to questions in the chat. And I'm sorry, you're going to lose me just for a second. And I do see 4. Thank you. There we go. So, boy, Mr. Marcus, I wish I had the specifics, but I love your question, and I think we should try to get the specifics you request. So let me read your question. What lessons have you learned from the rural electrification effort, and how much was spent per capita? What was the formula? And was usage regulated, or the amount of subsidy based on individual household use? So I'm afraid I don't know the answer to all of this, but I do want to talk about this issue of regulated usage. Clearly, I think there's been a shift in this concept of broadband as an essential service, like electricity or water. And so some people say that it should be called a utility. But of course, when you tell or use the word utility, then the providers of the service worry about regulation. And so we try to skirt around using that word and say instead it's an essential service. We had a conversation with the White House a week ago, Wednesday, where we were talking about affordability. And I do believe that introducing competition in markets can only do so much, especially because networks take so long to build and penetrate. So let's say if we were to give funds to build a network, it would take maybe 3 years to get it up and running and to get people to subscribe. And in the meantime, we would have many people who still weren't able to afford. So I think initially there has to be some kind of subsidy program. And then the question is, if we introduce competition and drive the price down from, say, between $70 and $80 to between 40 and 50, we would still have a huge number of people who could not afford that and still need to be either at free or $10 to $15 per month. So I think that the formula right now for infrastructure is being based, let's just take the 10 billion coming from Treasury, which we didn't really mention, but which I'll talk about now. That $10 billion is going to be, 100 million is going to be given to each of the 50 states. The territories would get 100 and tribes would get 100. And then your money that comes on top of that 100 million is based on formula, population formula, also the percent of unserved or rural areas in the state. So somewhat that is what they're describing at Treasury. Bob Shaw asks, how does the USA compare to other industrial and third world countries in terms of quality of broadband infrastructure? And how does Illinois compare to other states? So I would say that it depends on where you live in the United States in terms of whether clearly South Korea, Taiwan, have the speediest broadband of all countries. Finland, let's see, there are other Danish and I believe it's Estonia who has extraordinarily great broadband. And in third world countries, they're really mostly looking at wireless as a way to have broadband available, which of course is the other layer that we didn't talk, and I'm glad Robbie has this slide up, because throughout Africa, for instance, fixed wireless and mobile wireless is really the way that broadband's being delivered, much like some of the way rural areas are receiving broadband. Illinois we did this affordability study and also looked at infrastructure, and I would say we really are probably about sort of in the second to the top quartile. Does that make sense? Between 50 and 75%. And getting better because of the 400 million prospective investment. And so I think that once we see that 400 million fully implemented, Illinois will be in the top tier at that point. And let me see, I'm looking at an astonishing number. This is Steve Fisher. An astonishing number of Americans are functionally illiterate, meaning they struggle to read and write in an 8th grade level. While we begin to address the digital divide, what steps are being taken to ensure the literacy gap is also addressed? And Robbie, would you like to, says you'd like to answer that. Did you? Oh no, I maybe, sorry, I thought it said here Robbie would like to answer that question, but I would like to say something about this, Steve. So it's interesting that right now in this country, middle skills jobs are the ones with a great deal of openings available, and this middle skills jobs require digital literacy. And so there is a real need to address basic digital skills for people to fill those jobs. But I totally concur when we look at digital literacy programs, not only is it the literacy of reading, but there are also so many people who don't speak English as a primary language. And so we, for instance, in our Illinois Connected Communities, were finding that materials had to be translated and put into Spanish in order to reach certain communities that we were working in. Surveys needed to be put into various languages to make sure that we got the input of people. And we found, interestingly enough, that kids whose parents were working and who were in the homes of their grandparents were often the ones interfacing with their grandparents on the not only literacy front, but on the language and other interventions that would require full participation by the household. So I'm seeing another question from Paul. I'm going to mess your last name up, Paul Safian. You need a resource to help solve technical problems in Waukegan, where we of Lake County United have initiated a broadband service. And actually, I've been talking to people in Waukegan, Paul, and they've applied to be in the second cohort of Illinois Connected Communities. So we're very excited. We haven't reviewed all the applications yet, but I did review the application from Waukegan, and I have to tell you how thrilled I was that this is a community-wide effort with some very strong players to try to initiate getting better broadband in Waukegan. And so I love the idea that you're here on the call, and yes, I've talked to a few of your fellow Waukeganers. And what are the two neighborhoods in Chicago we're currently working in? It's the South Shore neighborhood and the McKinley Park neighborhood. These were two neighborhood groups who applied to be in the program. One of them was Neighborhood Network Alliance from South Shore, and the McKinley Park Development Council was the second. And again, Robbie's been very much a part of the effort with both of those. Do you want to say something, Robbie? Come on.
Sure. Yeah, it's been, can people hear me okay and see me? I'm not sure. Okay. Yeah, it's been really, really great working. I think that's, Adrianne had pointed to it in the slide of democracy in action. We're seeing groups of communities, particularly the South Shore community, is a very high activist community, a lot of volunteers that have a history of trying to improve their neighborhood through a variety of different solutions, whether on it's education inequities or food desert problems. And when they signed up to be a part of this program, they recognized it as an equity issue. That was one of the main things one of the leaders said right off, right at the start of the program was the digital divide is an equity issue. And for people that are, from the South Shore area that are familiar with dealing with inequality throughout the years, they just kind of saw it as the next step. And so to kind of see them mobilize and see them take advantage of all these things has been really inspiring, particularly because, it wasn't young people leading the charge. It was people, I think, that might be retired that are volunteering and understanding the importance that broadband can have in the South Shore community. So it's been a really, really positive experience. Adrianne, how do you feel if I read you some of the questions this way so that you don't have to focus on?
I don't mind doing it. There's just a couple more, okay. And I don't think we have much time, but I love Mark Shields' question. This seems to be a perfect bipartisan effort, and is this happening? So I want to say that I want to tell the story of one of our board members works in these, both in local communities at the community level, at the county level, and at the state level. And she tells me that this is the perfect bipartisan effort. And I say that it's the perfect bipartisan effort outside of Washington, D.C. And in fact, I would venture to say that Republicans on the ground are kind of furious at Republicans in Washington for not being more aggressive on the broadband issue. They don't look at this as a R versus D issue. They look at this as a community. How are they going to keep communities vibrant? We had a conversation with a cattle rancher in a county the size of Connecticut in Wyoming, who said, and I think there were 3 towns in the county ranging from 2,000 population to 10,000, very boomer bust because it's very energy heavy on the jobs front, and also very cattle heavy on the other. And basically he said, I just know that if we don't put broadband into our county, we're just going to continue to have the kind of, brain drain of youth leaving our communities. And so they really look at this as a way to retain young people in their communities and to do all the things that we've described here. So I do look at this as a bipartisan issue. I will say that sometimes the Republicans are a little more focused on what we call the free market, and corporations will solve the problem. But I think we've proven over the years that that if many of these companies who are, driven to be very shareholder, look at the returns for shareholders, are too concerned with a return on investment to get broadband to the last percentage of people who, with maybe government funding, we could reach those people. Let's see. Margaret asks, on the one slide of 3 bills facing congressional approval, is the intent to provide broadband over all the US or certain specific areas? And if there are hotspots given to families in specific locations, can they move and take their capacity with them? Oh, depends on who's given you your hotspot. If you've gotten your hotspot from PCs for People, you can take it anywhere. If you got your hotspot from your school, you're not going to be able to leave it. If you got your hotspot from your internet service provider and you were moving to the if you were leasing your hotspot, then you're not going to be able to take it with you. So, and hotspots are generally not, they were a great emergency solution, but I don't view hotspots as a good permanent solution. And so I want to be clear about that. I think that it was in the time that those CARES Act dollars were given to people to spend, and there was a deadline for spending those funds, buying devices and hotspots was a very good thing, but I don't view it as the best option long-term. And you had these 3, that's right, Robbie, thank you. Is the intent to provide broadband overall? No, it's really where it isn't in these particular areas. That's why getting states and local people involved in the decision-making behind where the funding goes is so important, because you wouldn't want to necessarily be bringing broadband to Evanston, Illinois. We have broadband here. May not be competitive broadband, but it's broadband. But you might be interested in bringing it to Brown County, Illinois, which was a place that we worked with that didn't have broadband service except for very slow speeds, or to Flanagan, Illinois, that also was using, old dial-up broadband. Let's see. Oh, someone's asked about satellite delivery. So I would say we don't love satellite. It's really expensive. It can be anywhere from $100 to $200 a month. These are these high orbiting satellites, Viasat and HughesNet. But there are low orbit satellites that are being deployed, and this is one of Elon Musk's new businesses called Starlink. And it's just being deployed, and we don't know how much better and how much less expensive. And I see you, Robbie, wanting to speak. But I'm not a huge fan, though. Of course, I'm a fan if that's all people have, right? I mean, if you need satellite to get on because you don't have any other option, then it's better than nothing. But who needs to deal with weather problems and satellites, right?
Yeah, I'm finding the satellite discussion very interesting because it used to never be much of a topic of conversation because the technology was so poor related to the richness of fiber. So not only were speed issues a problem with satellite, you also had latency, inconsistency, so the reliability wasn't very good. So there were a lot of different features to the technology of satellite that made it not really a plausible actual competitor in addition to the high cost. Now with the SpaceX thing and Starlink, like what Adrianne had mentioned with Elon Musk, that could be changing. It is using a new technology. It's using lower orbiting satellites. It's using a new technology with the antenna. But from what we've seen, it doesn't anticipate on being an urban or really suburban technology because there would be too many people. So the idea is more of
interference.
like,
Too much interference.
It's more of a like 5G mobile broadband competitor, like kind of in a way a more reliable, at least for rural areas, something like a high-speed cell phone connection type deal.
So, Mr. Penn, I think you're the last question. Has there been any plan on how broadband can be the foundation for providing more STEM business relationships for disadvantaged communities? I love this question. One of our applicants for the next round of Illinois Connected Communities is actually just this issue. They want to bring a computer lab and broadband connections into a high school that is just decided that they're going to introduce STEM curriculum. And so this pairing of the STEM curriculum with the broadband and the computer lab in this it's about, the community I think is 85% Hispanic, and it's on the edge of Cook County. And I think it's just a wonderful experiment to try to combine these two things and really help give skills to teenagers and job opportunities, obviously, once they leave high school. So I think we're a little over time, Nancy, and you wanted to close up. And I'm sorry if I didn't get to everybody's question, but thank you so much again.
What you did do, though, was amazing and wonderful to bring in Waukegan and local communities and STEM questions. The Q&A was very helpful and eventful. So thank you for all, but I can't help but look back to those pictures you produced of your grandparents. We were fortunate to know them and even took a trip with them. So that was very special and lovely to keep our two clans connected.
Oh, Nancy, thank you. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you and Warwick as well through this process.
And thank you, Adrianne, for that clear, well-researched call to action. I'm inspired by your vision, and I think our watchers are too. For the future, the work you and the Institute and your colleagues and Robbie are doing. It's wonderful work and important work. And we will be, with your permission, and we've had the permission, putting up this talk on our website, but we'll also put up links. And if Robbie, if you will give us a link to your newsletter, that would be grand too. We can include that as well, because I'm hoping that there will be more and more people who have a chance to see this program again from our website and to keep connected with the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society.